Karen's screams echoed through the neighborhood as dozens of slimy green frogs clung to her body. It was a bright Wednesday afternoon when the peace of our quiet suburban street was shattered, and the woman who once called herself the ruler of the neighborhood was reduced to flailing helplessly in front of shocked onlookers. Her floral blouse, once neat, was smeared with dirt and slime as frogs latched onto her shoulders, arms, and legs. Some leapt across the grass, others clung stubbornly to her clothes and hair, while neighbors gasped from their porches, some horrified, some amused, and several recording the surreal chaos on their phones. Karen's face twisted in terror, her shrill voice piercing through the air, and for the first time, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA looked powerless. But this scene, as unforgettable as it was, did not come out of nowhere. It was the climax of months of frustration, arrogance, and escalating conflict that had begun the day I moved into my new home. When I first stepped into the house, I imagined peace, comfort, and the simple joy of unwinding by the pool after a long day's work. It was a dream realized, or so I thought, until Karen decided that my property was nothing more than an extension of her imagined dominion. I had heard whispers about her from neighbors before closing on the house, rumors about how she micromanaged everything, how she treated the HOA presidency like a royal crown, how she enforced rules selectively depending on whether she liked you or not. I dismissed those stories as exaggerated gossip at first. After all, every neighborhood has its eccentric residents. I believed keeping to myself and being polite would avoid conflict. I could not have been more wrong. The first week after moving in, I came home from work exhausted, only to find Karen and two of her friends lounging in my swimming pool like it was a private resort. Their laughter carried across the yard, their drinks floating on inflatables, and their attitude as if my home was their clubhouse. I approached them respectfully, explaining that it was my private property. But Karen, with that mocking smirk she always carried, waved me off. "I'm the HOA president," she said smugly, "and no one can stop me from using the pool. Consider it part of the community." My blood boiled, but I held back. I thought perhaps it was a misunderstanding or a bad joke, so I let it go. The next day, I purchased large, clear, no trespassing signs and installed them around the pool and the yard. I wanted to send a polite but firm message that my boundaries were to be respected. That evening, however, as the sun set and the lights around the pool flickered on, I returned to find the same disturbing scene, Karen and her friends splashing and laughing as if they owned the place. This time, they didn't just ignore me, they ridiculed me openly. Karen laughed loud enough for the neighbors to hear, mocking my attempt to enforce property rights. Her friends giggled, and one even toasted with a drink in my direction as though to say, "What are you going to do about it?" That was the moment I knew politeness would not work with Karen. Her arrogance was not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act of trespass and intimidation. But I also knew I had to be smart. Direct confrontation would lead to her twisting the situation, as she always did, using her title as HOA president like a shield. I needed evidence, strategy, and most importantly, patience. And so the plan began to form. While Karen enjoyed flaunting her imaginary power, I quietly prepared for the moment she would expose herself to the entire neighborhood. It started small. I began collecting information, stories from neighbors about how Karen fined some for trivial issues while excusing herself from the same rules, how she intimidated the elderly into silence, and how she retaliated against anyone who dared challenge her. I learned about the veteran who built a wheelchair, ramp only to be fined for modifying the aesthetic of the neighborhood, and the single mother, who was harassed because her children left bicycles in the driveway. The more I listened, the clearer it became. Karen had abused her authority for far too long, and people were simply too afraid to challenge her directly. That was when I realized that I couldn't just protect my own property. I had the chance to set an example that could empower the whole neighborhood. But first, I needed to trigger her arrogance in a way that would backfire publicly. That was where the frogs came in. There was a pond not far from my house, a shallow, mossy place filled with croaking amphibians. I spent an afternoon with buckets, carefully gathering dozens of them, knowing Karen's obsession with using my pool would soon give me the opportunity. By Friday evening, the buckets were hidden just behind the pool fence, out of sight, waiting like a secret weapon. And as expected, Karen and her entourage arrived once again, laughing as though my warnings meant nothing. They jumped into the water without hesitation, oblivious to what was about to unfold. That was when I acted. With steady hands and a calm resolve, I lifted the buckets and poured their contents into the pool. In an instant, the water exploded with chaos, frogs leaping, swimming, clinging. Karen's laughter transformed into shrieks of horror as the amphibians latched onto her arms, her shoulders, even her hair. She thrashed in panic, slipping and stumbling as her friends scrambled out of the pool, screaming and slipping on the wet pavement. The sound carried through the street, drawing curious neighbors from their homes, some rushing to see what was happening, others instinctively raising their phones to record the spectacle. What they captured was not just slapstick chaos, but the downfall of a tyrant. Karen, drenched, slimed, and shrieking, was exposed before the very people she once ruled over with intimidation. And I stood silently nearby, recording the scene myself, knowing this was the evidence I needed. The humiliation was only the beginning. Karen thought she could twist the law, but the law twisted back harder than she ever imagined. The night of the frog incident was only the beginning, because when the police arrived and saw the chaos, Karen tried to play the same card she always did, her title as HOA president. But this time the officers didn't laugh with her, they stood firm. I showed them the no trespassing signs, the recordings I had made, and the overwhelming evidence of her arrogance. The neighbors, too, came forward, sharing what they had witnessed and how Karen had bullied the community for years. For the first time, Karen had no power to silence anyone. The police confirmed what I already knew. She had trespassed, she had violated my rights, and her HOA status gave her no authority over my private property. That night she left humiliated, but the fight was far from over. I gathered my evidence, videos, witness statements, photographs, and I took her to court. The hearing was tense, but the facts spoke louder than Karen's excuses. The judge reviewed the case and issued a ruling that left no room for doubt. Karen was guilty of unlawful trespassing and violation of privacy. The penalty was harsh enough to shatter her illusion of control, heavy fines and mandatory community service. And so, the woman who once strutted through the neighborhood with false authority was now seen in broad daylight, picking up trash along the very streets where she once barked orders. Neighbors who once feared her now watched with satisfaction, some even smiling as justice unfolded before their eyes. For me, it was never just about a pool. It was about drawing a line that Karen, or anyone like her, could never cross again. My property was mine, my peace was mine, and now the whole neighborhood knew that no crown, no title, and no arrogance could take that away.